Hi, welcome to class. My name is Don Lafond, Professor Don, and this week in our Cisco 1 class, we're covering Module 2, Basic Switch End Device Configuration. We're going to review the iOS, some of the basic commands like hostname and assigning an IP address, and we're going to also assign some passwords and encrypt those passwords. It's going to be an interesting class. These are basic commands that you are going to use over and over and over again. Make sure you record these passwords in your tech notebook. Now, if you're watching this presentation online as a recording, if you're in my NetAcad class, current class, please ask your questions in the help discussion forum. If you're watching it, if you're live with me here tonight, then please, I'll give you a Q&A at the end of the course. Hold your questions to the end and ask the questions then, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. And if you are watching this on YouTube, you can ask the questions in the in the comments below the presentation, and I do appreciate your interaction. I also appreciate those thumbs up as well. And if I can improve on anything, please let me know. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. That's the first step. And then I have a couple modification things I have to do. If I drag this over here. And I have to go full screen. Unfortunately, NetAcad is down today during our presentation. Normally, I play the videos that are available inside of the NetAcad content. Remember, it's critical for you to go through the NetAcad content as you are learning this material. Watch the videos as you come across them. I even recommend that you do the labs, the packet tracer and the NetLab, or the labs that just are paper and pencil. Not really. You still type the answers to those. But I recommend that you do them in order as they are presented. Don't wait until you go through all the material and then do them all at one time. The way NetAcad is set up, it gives you pieces, chunks of information, and then a packet tracer to test your knowledge on it, chunks of information, and a lab to test your knowledge. And that's the best way to learn it. Now, since I don't have those videos, I am going to strongly urge you to watch the videos. Me talking about the commands can be a little confusing, and I go quite rapidly through this presentation. If you go watch the videos inside the classroom, it'll be a second review of the commands before you actually have to do those commands. All right, so let's get going. So tonight, we are going to learn about initial settings, including passwords, IP addressing, and default gateway parameters on a network switch and end devices. We're going to explain how to access a Cisco iOS device for configuration purposes. I'm going to explain how to navigate Cisco iOS to configure network devices. I'll describe the command structure of a Cisco iOS software. We'll configure a Cisco iOS device using the CLI. By the way, iOS, well, we'll see in a minute, stands for Inner Networks Operating System. The operating system for routers and switches and other devices as well. We'll explain how devices communicate across network media. We will learn about the iOS commands, how to save them to from the running configuration to the startup configuration. We'll configure a host device with an IP address, and we'll verify connectivity between two end devices. This is going to take just about an hour for the presentation. We'll start with the Cisco iOS soft access. So as you learned in your hardware class, there's three pieces of an operating system. Well, there's two pieces of the operating system and then the actual hardware itself. The shell is your interaction with the software. You interact with the software. This would, at the shell level, this would be Microsoft Windows. It would be Apple, what are they up to? 12, I believe. It would be Linux and whatever distro you're currently using. That is the shell. Now, the kernel is the software that talks to the hardware. You cannot move, literally, you cannot move a data into a register. You cannot uh, literally have something saved to the hard drive from RAM, right? You you talk to the shell. The shell talks to the kernel talks to the hardware itself. Now, that's what an operating system does. It gives you the ability to interact with hardware through that kernel. Now, a GUI is a graphical user interface, and you're familiar with Microsoft Word. Now, a GUI is user-friendly and requires less knowledge of the underlying command structure that controls the system. And in addition to Windows, there's also Mac OS, Linux. They show you one distro, KDE. There's lots of them. Apple, iOS, and Android. Now, GUIs can fail, crash, or simply not operate as specified. For this reason, network devices are typically accessed through a command line interface. Now, you use a mouse in a GUI, use a mouse, and you can type text. Obviously, when you click on something like the search bar, you're going to type text. But a command line interface does not have a pretty operating system to interact with. At least generally it doesn't. Now, I used to say back in the day, I used to say command line interface is job security because the CEO can easily use a Windows application to configure devices. For moving files around, for example, in the Windows file manager. No problem deleting files and other things you can do in Windows just by pointing and clicking and typing a few commands and you're there. But to know the actual commands at I call it the DOS level, the command line level, because I learned Windows back when it was Windows 3.11. Right before that, it had, to get to Windows 3.11, you actually had to go to the DOS line. It ended with the C prompt and you had to type Win, W-I-N, back in those days to load Windows. Now the operating system is the GUI. The GUI is the operating system. But back in Windows 3.11, the operating system was just a program that ran on a PC. Anyways, well, we've come a long way since then. Now, I used to call command line interface job security because and I still believe somewhat it is, because most people do not use command line. Most people. Now, there are tech people, obviously, that are configuring Windows that are going to use command line. And if you went through the Windows operating systems course at this school, you learned both the GUI version and the command line version. So they teach you both because you will be using a combination of both. I want to tell you now that when I first went through these courses, I hated command line because I had to memorize all of these commands and they were quite challenging. That was where my command line reference book, that for some random reason I moved it from its normal place, but you've seen me hold it up in the air before. Oh, here it is. So the command line book came in handy because I actually would look up commands. After you do it for a little while, you start learning the commands and the nuances of each command. But I want to tell you that it's really at the basic level where we're learning Cisco 1, 2, 3 at the college level. We're learning the operating system at the CLI. But when you're actually out in the workforce, when you're on a live system working with real routers and switches, at some point you are going to be using management software that is monitoring, for example, all of the equipment. So there is still a GUI. And after I went through all of Cisco, I was relieved that the upper level courses that you can take, the upper level training that you can take, is all about how to use these management programs to manage the network. And then, as we learned at the end of last class, there's also some programming that you're going to learn if you're around Cisco long enough. And that programming allows you to to change hundreds or maybe thousands of switches and routers, depending on how big your company is, definitely tens of switches and routers, using software at a much higher level than what we're doing. But just like when you learned HTML, for those of you that know how to build websites, when you take a web page development course, they're going to teach you how to use HTML. And I personally learned on a Notepad that my teacher had us use Notepad to actually go and write basic websites with Notepad. And so that was the start. You have to learn the understanding of the underlying command structure before you can build web pages with Dreamweaver, for example, because Dreamweaver expects you to understand some of the underlying content when you want to make command line, if you will, level changes to the website. All right, so that's my indication. Don't be afraid of this. Yes, we learn command line at this class, in this class, and next class, and the following class. But down the road, there are software programs that you are going to be using, learning, and using that will help you to avoid getting into the weeds, if you will. Maybe stay at the tree level, or who knows, maybe at the forest level, right? Now, you access a computer for the very first time using a console. Now, a switch, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think I did, a switch is automatically on. All of the ports are on. So you can connect a PC to a switch and then the switch to another PC, and it's up and running. They can communicate, no problem. Now, a router has to be configured. You have to give it an IP address and on a port. And to be able, a router to be able to communicate with, and a subnet to be able to communicate with the subnet, the network it's connected to. But so you have to go into a router. A router is down by default, and you have to go into it. And how we initially configure a router is using a console cable. Now, console cable is a Cisco proprietary cable that looks exactly what you're seeing there. It is blue. And you connect it, I'll show you in a couple of screens, you connect it to the serial port on a computer, as they're showing here. As they're showing here, you connect it to the back of a laptop with, or I guess a regular computer like in our computer labs, using a serial cable. Now, today, you don't find too many serial cables on computers anymore. So there are serial to USB adapters that you connect the serial cable to a USB. You load the software onto the device and then the PC, and then you're able to communicate with the device over a USB port. So anyways, so the console cable, oh, and by the way, it connects to the back of the switch and the router in a blue port. It's outlined in blue. It's really hard to mess it up. So a console cable is physical management port used to access a device in order to provide maintenance, such as performing the initial configuration. Secure Shell establishes a secure remote CLI connection to the device, command line interface connection, through a virtual interface over a network. Notice this is the recommended method because it is secure. You can also telnet into a piece of equipment using the software telnet, the protocol telnet. It established an insecure or unsecure remote CLI connection to a device over the network. We'll see in a few minutes, or at some point in this course, they actually show you what that looks like, how telnet, you can actually read the passwords, whereas Secure Shell, you cannot read the passwords, it's all encrypted. Now, when you connect it to a PC, you have to access the router or the switch using a terminal emulation program. Now, I'll show you what a terminal looks like in just a moment. But we emulate that terminal using either a PuTTY or TerraTerm, and there's another one called Secure CRT that I don't believe is loaded on any of our computers. But PuTTY and TerraTerm are two different options. This is what putty looks like. I think this is, yeah, this is what Terratrum looks like, I think, yeah. And then I also have web CRT, I'm sorry, secure CRT here. I can't actually read that, but maybe you guys can. Yep, this is secure CRT. And then it shows you the command structure. Now, this is what a terminal was. So when you see the term terminal, what it really refers to is an old school term that refers to a dumb terminal that is connected to a mainframe computer. And this is, I hate to admit it, but when I was working on my master's degree, no, my bachelor's degree, at Webster University in Virginia, and we used a large mainframe, and we actually sat at these terminals. I didn't know the term would still survive all these years, although we don't use terminals anymore. We use terminal emulation to make the PC pretend it still has the interface that it had back then. Now, iOS navigation. The primary commands, the primary commands as a secure feature, the Cisco iOS software separates management access into the following command modes. Now it calls two. I like to think that there are three distinct management access because I also think, or I include a global configuration is a type of management access, but I don't want to confuse you. They say there's two management access. I'll leave it here. So the first one is UserExec Mode. So if you just turn on a computer, it boots into either router or switch with a greater sign, and that is user. Any user, anybody can start a computer and get to some limited number of basic monitoring commands like show version. Show version will show the operating system that's running on the computer, and it will allow you to see some basic information about how much RAM there is and things like that. It has that greater than symbol next to the word router or switch. Now, privileged exec mode, that's the next level. You have to type the word enable to get to the privileged exec mode, and the privileged exec mode has a pound sign next to it. It allows more commands and features to be run, mainly the configuration. Now here it says higher configuration modes like global configuration and some of the sub-configuration modes are available from privileged exec modes. So, and we'll see those in just a couple of minutes. Global configuration is once you type, for example, config T or configure terminal. I'll explain why I can write a brief command instead of writing all of it in a little while. But when I type configure terminal, I get moved into global configuration mode. Now, global configuration mode is used for configuring anything that deals with the entire router or switch. Now, if I want to deal with something specific, like I want to deal with the console lines, then I have to go into sub-configuration mode. And here you can see I am in the sub-configuration mode for the console line. This is how it shows that I'm in here. Here, I'm in the sub-configuration mode for an interface. IF is not if, it's interface. Configure interface.
We lost volume.
So I always thought in one of these, especially in the IF, config IF, I always thought the IF stood for interface config if. I read config if, which means nothing, of course. When I finally a light bulb went off over my head, probably in Cisco too someplace. I thought, oh, configure interface, I get it. Configure line, I get it. It's telling you which sub-configuration you're in. And again, if it just says configure, you're in the global configuration where you can make changes to everything, not just to your console line or to your interface. There is a video that I want you to watch in the classroom. Again, I don't have access to NetAcad right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, these videos are also loaded inside of several websites that you can find. I personally have used a website, if I can find it really quick. Hang on, I'm gonna push pause. So if you're in my YouTube audience watching this video, there's a wonderful website, itexamanswers.net, that has basically the NetAcad content in it. I'm not sure why NetAcad allows them to have it, but it is out there. And you can scroll through and see all of the same content that's in our actual classroom. Now here is, for example, the video for the primary command modes. I'm going to go ahead and play it, and then we will see how that goes. I'm not sure how it will sound as a recording from this website, but let's see how it goes.
Let's examine the Cisco iOS command modes. I'll click on PC1, click on the terminal emulation program, click OK, and you can see that I'm presented with a console command line interface. This is the Cisco iOS. I'll press enter on my keyboard to get started. Notice the command prompt at the bottom left of the screen, which indicates the command mode that I'm in. The Cisco iOS uses different command modes to establish various privilege levels for users. Different commands are available in each mode. For instance, the word switch, which is the default name of the switch, with the greater than sign, indicates that I'm in UserExec mode. UserExec mode has very little privileges with access to only a limited number of commands. One of those commands available in this mode is the enable command. At the blinking cursor, I'll type the command enable and press enter, and I'm now in PrivilegedExec mode. I can tell this because the prompt has changed from a greater than sign to a hash or a pound sign. PrivilegedExec mode offers a higher privilege level for the user and more commands are available. If I would like to go to a higher level, I can go into Global Configuration Mode, or Global Config Mode for short. I can reach Global Config Mode by typing in Configure Terminal and pressing Enter. And now you can see the Global Configuration prompt. This is where most configurations of a switch or a router take place. There are also sub-configuration modes like Interface Configuration Mode. If I type Interface VLAN 1 and press Enter, I'm presented with a prompt that indicates I am now in Interface Configuration Mode. Many commands will only work from within certain modes. A common mistake made by users new to working with the Cisco iOS is trying to use commands from within the wrong mode. If you are sure that you are typing a command correctly, but you are continually getting an error message, always check your prompt to make sure you are in the right mode.
Okay, so for an example there, what she was saying with having the right command, I often type show in global configuration mode, and you can't use the show command in global configuration mode straight up. You can't just type show IP interface brief. You can't do that. You have to go back to the PrivilegedExec mode. Some commands you can type like show version. I already gave you that example. You go all the way back to the UserExec mode to type those commands. So you got to check which command, look at the greater than, the pound sign, config interface, and it will tell you where you are, and that tells you what you can and cannot type. Okay, good. So that I think I might be able to share the videos with you through that secondary site, and that actually helps you guys that are out on the web, because you can see the same videos that I'm seeing in the same place. That's great. Now, navigating between the modes, PrivilegedExec Mode, to get from UserExec Mode to PrivilegedExec Mode, you type enable, like she showed you in the video. To go from PrivilegedExec Mode to Global Configuration Mode, you type configure terminal, and then you hit enter, and then you can see here you type the word configure terminal, and you type the word configure terminal, and you then are in global configuration mode. Subconfiguration mode, line configuration mode, for example, to move in and out of a configuration mode. In this case, the line, use the line command followed by the management type. To return to the global configuration mode, use exit. So here we're going into line console 0. We're going into the console line to be able to configure out that port that you can connect a laptop with that blue cord I showed you earlier. You connect it to if anybody just walks up to your equipment, if you don't have a password on the console line, somebody can just take their own laptop, a console cable, connect it to your switch or router, and they're in your network, and then they can create all sorts of havoc. So you need to configure a password on your console line, for example, and I'll show you that in the next few slides. Right now, they just went to line console, and then they showed you now you are in config line. To get out of it, you type exit, or you can type end. And now if you go exit, you go back one step. If you do end, you go all the way back to the PrivilegedExec mode. And then you can actually go from one sub-configuration to another sub-configuration by just going to it. So here we're in the line configuration, sub-configuration, line sub-configuration mode, and we're jumping to the interface sub-configuration mode for Fast Ethernet 01. And now you can see we're in config interface. Here's a video on 2.2.5. Let's see if I can find that. 2.2.5.
Let's look at the commands that are used to move between the different iOS command modes. We'll look at the enable command, the disable command, configure terminal, exit, and using Control-Z on your keyboard, plus some commands to enter different sub-configuration modes. I have a console connection to a switch, so I'll click on PC1 and press enter, and it takes me to UserExec mode. Notice the prompt at the lower left of the screen. To enter PrivilegedExec mode, I type enable. If I want to return back to UserExec mode, I can type disable. I'll type enable to return to PrivilegedExec mode. In order to configure the switch, I need to first get to global configuration mode or global config. I'll type configure terminal, and you can see now that I'm in the global configuration prompt. I can type exit and press enter to return to PrivilegedExec mode. If I type exit again, I leave my console connection altogether. To re-enter the switch and get a command line interface, I have to press enter on my keyboard. And now I'm brought back to the console connection with the switch. I'll type enable and press enter, and then config T, short for configure terminal, and now I'm back in global config mode. Let's enter one of the sub-configuration modes. I'll type line console 0 to get to the management interface for the console port. Now that I'm in a sub-configuration mode, if I type exit, I return to global config mode. This time, I'll type line VTY 0 space 15 for my virtual terminal management interfaces. These are used for remote administrative access to the switch. I can move directly from one subconfiguration mode to another. Notice if I type in interface VLAN 1 and press enter, that my prompt has changed from line configuration mode to interface configuration mode. From here, I can also enter different interfaces like interface, fast Ethernet 0/1. And as long as I don't see an error message that I've typed an invalid command, I'm in interface config mode for fast Ethernet 0/1. I can also move directly to the line console 0. Commands that are normally run in global config mode can also be run from any of the sub-configuration modes as well. If I want to exit out of all sub-configuration modes and return to privileged exec mode, I can use the N command or press Ctrl-Z on my keyboard. Let's give that a try. I'll type end, press enter, enter again, and you can see now that I've returned all the way back to privileged exec mode. I'll return to global configuration mode and then into line console 0. And this time I'll hold down the control key and press Z. And if I press enter, you can see that I'm brought all the way back to privileged exec mode. If I'm in global configuration mode and I type end and press enter, I'm also brought back to privileged exec mode. Learning to navigate efficiently between the different command modes will save you a lot of time.
Go ahead on. Go. I have a golden retriever that thinks he's part of my presentations. I think I already told you that. So please be patient. If you hear heavy breathing, that's not me. Go ahead on. All right, the command structure. So now when we're talking about commands, we've seen a couple already, but the command structure, first of all, what mode are you in? Are you in UserExec, global configuration? That's the prompt, and you can see in this case, we are in UserExec because it's a greater than sign. And then here you can use the command show, that's the command, and then a space in between show and the command. And the command in this case is IP protocols. That's the keyword or argument. Now, the keyword, that is the actual thing that can change. Like you can do show for a whole bunch of things. I've already listed a couple of them, like show, IP interfaces brief to see the current status of your interfaces. Anyway, so the show is the command, and then whatever goes after it is what you're going to show. Here's another example. Here we're still in UserExec mode, and we're going to ping, which is a command you probably used it before on a PC, and we're going to ping a specific IP address. That is the user supplied address. Now, as you move through this course, if you're taking it in NetAcad, and I assume most of you are, if you're taking it, there are these things called syntax checkers. Now, the syntax checker requires you to type the exact and full command as necessary. So you can't type config T, for example. You have to type the full command configure terminal. At first I found that a little frustrating, but when you're typing out the full commands, you're actually wiring your brain to learn those commands. If you are only typing config T, then you're wiring your brain for config T, and then maybe you get an exam question on the CCNA and you have a brain fart because you remember config T, but it's not one of the options, and you forget that it's configure terminal, blah, blah, blah. It becomes a problem. So the syntax checker is how you actually learn how to type the command. So if any of you are trying to skip the NetAcad content and just do all the packet traces, you're not going to actually learn the material because you need to run through these syntax checkers. In the syntax check, for example, and they're just talking about how the commands are explained inside of all of our assignments that we're going to do this course. So if it's bold-faced, The boldface text indicates commands and keywords that you entered literally as shown. It's, for example, ping is bold because you have to type it exactly like that. Italics indicates arguments for which you supply values, like an IP address. If you have something inside of a bracket, a square bracket, it indicates an optional element. If it's inside of a brace, it indicates a required element. And sometimes you'll see some pretty complex examples here on the next page. You don't need to understand this, but all they're doing is showing bold. They're just showing bold. Here, let me put on my laser whip. A little bit easier for me. Here you see ping, it's bold. IP address is optional. Whatever IP address you want to ping, you put in there. Now, here they made a mistake. This ping should also be bold because that remains the same. But an IPv6 should be bold because in order to ping an IPv6 address, you have to type exactly that. Then optional is whatever IP address you are using. And then here they use traceroute and an IP address. This would be bold, this would be optional. This is required, that's optional. And here is an example using switchport port security. And then in this case, the command for aging, with switchport port security aging, these are all your options for it. And I'm not going to take the time to explain that to you because it probably is not something you'll understand, and we'll get to it at some point, probably in our next class. Not next class, next semester. iOS help. Now, iOS has two forms of help available: context-sensitive help and command syntax check. Now, content-sensitive help enables you to quickly find answers to these questions. The questions are, which commands are available in each command mode? Which commands start with the specific characters or groups of characters, and which arguments or keywords are available for a particular command. I'm going to zoom in on this. I was able to do it yesterday. So in this case, ping with a space and then question mark returns the three options that you can have after the word ping. You could ping a word like Google. You can ping Google. You can ping an IPv4 address, or you can ping an IPv6 address. Now, you can also, it also gives you help to verify you typed a valid command. If the interpreter cannot understand the command you have typed, then it will put we call this a caret. It will put a caret under the first letter of what doesn't make any sense to the software. So in this case, typing interface space fast Ethernet doesn't make any sense to the software. You need show interface fast Ethernet if you want to show the command, or you need to go into interface configuration mode to be, I don't know, no, you're not in global configuration mode. You need to go into global configuration mode. You can't jump to the interface from PrivilegedExec mode. You have to jump to global configuration mode. Then you can go to the sub configuration mode. I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to do there, to try to show information about it or to get to the interface. But either way, it's saying you can't do that with this command, and then you just go look hard at what they're actually offering you. Okay, now here's a video to explain context-sensitive help and command text. It's 2.3.4.
The Cisco iOS help command is accessed by using the question mark. The help command is context sensitive, so it matters how and where you use the question mark. For instance, let's say I want a list of all the commands that are available to me in UserExec mode. I simply type a question mark and I'm returned the commands that are available in UserExec mode. If I type enable and enter PrivilegedExec mode and put in a question mark, I'm given the commands that are available to me in PrivilegedExec mode. I'll press the space bar to get the next page of output. An even different set of commands is available to the user in global configuration mode. Notice I'll go to global config mode, put in a question mark, and I'm given a completely different set of commands that are available in this particular command mode. There are other uses for the help command as well. Let's say that I don't want a listing of all of the commands that are available, and I just want help finishing one particular command. For instance, let's say I'm putting in the command interface, but I've forgotten what the complete command name is. I've typed IN, and I need help finishing the command. I can put in part of a command, and then put in a question mark, and it'll help me finish the command. Notice that I put in IN and then a question mark, and the help command has returned that the command that I'm looking for is interface. I can use the help command in another context as well. So now that I know that the command is interface, let's say I'm not sure what the next command parameter or argument is that goes with the interface command. In this case, I'll put a space and then a question mark, and it'll tell me the next parameter or argument that is required by the interface command. Now I know that the next part of the command is either the name of the interface like Ethernet, Fast Ethernet, Gigabit Ethernet, or maybe it's VLAN or range. Related to the help command is the command syntax checker. The command syntax checker will let me know when I have a problem with the command that I've put in. For instance, we can see here that the next part of this command would be one of these arguments here. Let's say I make a mistake and I type in the number 33 instead of VLAN or range and hit enter. Notice that the command syntax checker has informed me that beginning at the number 3, I've made an invalid input. This is extremely useful because it helps me to isolate where the problem is with the particular command that I've entered. This can work in different contexts as well. For instance, let's say that I've put in just the letter I instead of interface and I hit enter. The command syntax checker informs me that the letter I is an ambiguous command. The reason being is that if I type in I and a question mark, there's actually two commands that begin with the letter I in global configuration mode, the command interface and the command IP. The third example of the command syntax checker is when I type in interface and hit enter, and the command syntax checker has informed me that the command is incomplete. To solve this, I put in interface again, a space and a question mark, and I'm given the next set of options that I need to finish this command. You can see how the help command is very useful in learning the different commands that are available to you, as well as the correct context and use of the different commands.
All right. Excellent video. All right. So the next thing we cover is the use of hotkeys and shortcuts. Now, the iOS CLI provides hotkeys and shortcuts that make configuring, monitoring, and troubleshooting easy. Commands and keywords can be shortened to a minimum number of characters that you identify a unique selection. I gave you the example of configure. Configure is the entire command, but you can shorten it to CONF because configure is the only command that begins with CONF. Now, they give you the example here of trying to make it just CON. Well, you can't make it CON because, look, CON with no space and a question mark gives you all commands that start with the letters CON. And you can see it's not just configure. Connect is also a command that starts with CON. Config T then is the correct shortest. Now you say, well, T, that must be a lot of commands, right? Well, no, because T, when it used with configure, T is one of the options for configure, and there's only one option for configure. So the T is perfectly fine. You couldn't just type T space something, because I'm sure T is connected to a lot of things, like CON was configured to 2 items here. Now to move around, tab, when you type configure, you can type tab and it actually writes out the word configure. Then you can type T and hit tab, it writes out the word terminal. I use it when I'm typing a command and I don't know if it's the right command. Why bother typing out the whole thing? If I do configure B and I hit tab and B doesn't actually work, the tab doesn't work, that means B's not an option. Then I type T and I hit tab, it gives me terminal. That's a silly example, but that's an example. Now you can also do backspace, so erase characters to the left of the cursor, delete to delete stuff to the right, left arrow to move the cursor back left. Now you'll do that a lot when you're changing things. I'll teach you how to do that as we move through the course. And Control B I've never actually used to move backwards, but you could, just like you could learn Control F. Right arrow moves one character to the right. So if you go back too far left, you can come back right. Now what you will use is the up arrow. Again, I haven't used Control P. Up arrow is pretty simple. It recalls the last command that was typed in the buffer, beginning with the most recent commands. You don't think the delete key works? No, of course the delete. I think the delete key works. I might be wrong. We can't prove it, so unless somebody wants to open up a packet trace. Somebody in the classroom just said they didn't think delete deleted characters to the right, but I don't know. I'd have to test that. Now you guys gave me some homework to do. I appreciate that. Anyways, up arrow is something that you are going to use because when you type a command, you might want to type that same command later. So for example, if I'm making VLANs for students, teachers, HR, and I have all the commands already in there, I don't want to have to keep typing, for example, the word student and then, I'm sorry, VLAN, I just want to hit the up arrow and it'll fill in the error, the words, and I just erase student, type teacher, hit enter, up arrow, erase teacher, type HR, you get the idea, right? So the default history command gives you 10 characters, but we'll learn, I think in this presentation, that you can change the history and actually have more than, you can have 200 if you want. Hotkeys. So when you do a command that has more output of text that fits on a single page, you can hit the enter key and it will display one line at a time. So hit enter and it moves down one line at a time. If you hit the space bar, it jumps to the next page, so you get a whole new page of text. If you hit any other key, it jumps out of it. Now, by habit, I always hit the escape key to get out of the command, but I guess I could hit any character and it'll get me out of it. Control C, when in any configuration mode, ends the configuration mode, and Control Z sometimes do. It depends on the actual configuration mode you're in. You do a Control C. If it doesn't work, do a Control Z. Now there's some things like DNS lookups, which I hate. You will run into a DNS lookup on something you didn't intend on being a DNS. When that happens, you have to remember the word Control Shift 6. Now I only remember that for a week or two after every class, because why did they make it so hard, Control Shift 6, to remember it? But it really is important. Otherwise, you got a 2 or 3 minute waiting if you've typed the wrong thing. So definitely type that down in your tech notebook so you have quick access to it. Here's a video for you. Video 2.3.6.
Support for hotkeys and shortcuts makes the Cisco iOS extremely efficient. Making use of these will save you lots of time when you're configuring devices. I have a console connection to a switch. However, instead of using the terminal emulation program to console in, this time I'll click directly on the switch and go to the CLI tab. If I press enter, I'm taken to the command line interface. This is a convenient shortcut to the CLI available to you within Packet Tracer. The first hotkey that I'll talk about is the tab key or tab completion for automatically completing your commands. You can use it like this. To get to PrivilegedExec Mode, I would normally type the command enable. With tab completion, you simply type the first few letters of the command, in this case EN, and press the tab key on your keyboard and the command is automatically completed for you. This is very useful. Now this will work if only one command begins with the letters EN. For instance, if I want to put in the command configure for configure terminal and I type CON and press tab, it doesn't work. The command isn't completed. That's because if I put in a question mark, you can see that there's more than one command beginning with the letters CON in PrivilegedExec Mode. If I want to use tab completion, I'll need to type CONF and press the tab key, and you can see now the command is completed. For terminal, all I need to do is type the letter T and press the tab key, as there's only one argument or secondary command that follows configure and begins with the letter T. So the switch knows that the command I want is terminal. Even better than using the tab key is command shortening. With command shortening, instead of pressing the tab key to complete the command, you simply use the first few letters of the command, and the iOS will accept the shortened command without hitting the tab key. This is extremely useful. For instance, instead of typing the command interface fast Ethernet 0/1, which is a very long command to type, I can shorten the command to just INT, which is short for interface, F, short for fast Ethernet, and 0/1, and press enter. The iOS automatically knows the command I want and executes it, though you won't see it displayed as you do with the tab completion. Command shortening can make you even more efficient when configuring devices. Sometimes it's necessary to repeat commands. The fastest way to do this is to cycle through your command history using your up arrow and down arrow keys. If I type END on my keyboard and press enter to go back to PrivilegedExec Mode, and then I press my up arrow key, you can see that there are two commands in my command history. Pressing the down arrow key will take me forwards in my command history. This is very useful for commands that are used repeatedly. Now let's take a look at some hotkeys. Both Control+Z and Control+C will take us back to PrivilegedExec Mode. If I hold down Control+Z and press enter, you can see that I'm back to the PrivilegedExec prompt. Control+C will do the same, and it can also be used to abort certain commands. For instance, if I type CONF and T and then change my mind, I can press Control+C and the command is aborted. Control+A will jump the cursor to the beginning of a line. I'll type configure and then press Control+A, and you can see that the blinking cursor is now back to the beginning of the line. If I press Control+E, the cursor jumps to the end of the line. Control+Shift+6 is another useful key combination. This sequence will interrupt the execution of a command after the command has already been entered. Let's say, for instance, I mistyped the command configure and press enter on my keyboard. The iOS is trying to translate the letters that I typed into an IP address. So instead of being stuck in this situation, I can simply press Control, Shift, and 6, and the command is aborted. Lastly, there may be times when you are working on the CLI of a device and an event occurs which generates a message interrupting the command you are typing. This can be very annoying. If this occurs, press Control+R on your keyboard to return to the prompt where the partial command will be displayed, allowing you to finish typing. This sequence is not currently supported in this version of Packet Tracer. I'll simulate the use of these hotkeys by consoling into a physical switch and shutting down an interface on the switch while I'm in the middle of typing a command. I'll press enter and type enable to get to PrivilegedExec mode, and then I'll go into global configuration mode. Let's say I want to enter interface G0/1. I'll start typing the command, and now I'll shut down an interface. You can see the message displayed across the screen. If I simply press Control+R, I return to where I left off, and I can keep on typing. Now that's sweet. Using hotkeys and shortcuts is a great way to save you time when working with the Cisco iOS.
Okay, so during that video, we got some interaction in the classroom talking about the delete key. Remember I told you earlier in the semester that there's a reason why we use NetLab to learn how real equipment works. And an example of that right now is the delete key. In real equipment, the delete key deletes one character to the right. So if you're in the middle of the word, say shift right here, if you're in the middle of the word shift, it would delete the I, hit it again, it'll delete the F and delete the T. But that's with real equipment. But one of the students actually opened Packet Tracer and tried to use real Packet Tracer and typed a command and then hit the delete key and nothing happened. So I'm not proving, so when I said the delete key works, really we're talking about with real equipment, and I'm not necessarily talking about Packet Tracer. I'm not teaching you Packet Tracer, I'm teaching you Cisco. So hopefully, I appreciate all the wonderful interaction in the chat room. It brought that, I was able to answer that question. Okay, awesome. So we're going to continue, and you're going to do a Packet Tracer 2.3.7, navigate the iOS. In this Packet Tracer, you will establish basic connections, access the CLI, explore help, explore the exec modes, and set the clock. How fun. You're also going to do a lab 2.3.8, navigating iOS. Now this is not in NetLab, in our college classroom. So you will be creating a Packet Tracer assignment to do the lab. You create your own Packet Tracer, and then you have to submit the Packet Tracer to me to show me that you created the Packet Tracer. It gives you some hands-on creating a Packet Tracer and configuring it accordingly, which is helpful. Basic device configuration. Now, the first configuration command on any device should be to give it a unique host name. By default, all devices are assigned a factory default name. For example, a Cisco iOS switch is named Switch. So if you were connecting to a switch, telnetting or SSHing into a switch, it would be named. This would be named Switch, and this would be named Switch, and this would be named Switch. So in order to know which switch you are on, you would create a name that's more complex than the word switch. Now, guidelines for naming devices, you need to start with a letter. It cannot contain any spaces. You end with a letter or digit. You use only letters, digits, and dashes. It must be less than 64 characters.
It can only be a pound or two to make a difference. Huh?
So here, for example, once you name it properly, they go ahead and give you an example of a naming convention. They name it switch floor 1 as what was listed in the picture, SW floor 1. The command is host name and then SW-floor-1. It meets all the criteria as listed there. And we now have a name. Instead of it just saying switch, it says switch floor 1. Password guidelines. Now, don't use weak passwords. Now, I'm not going to read all the restrictions or suggestions here, but what I am going to tell you is that Cisco, in most of the labs in this class, they give you simple passwords like Cisco or class. Now, it's really important to realize that's in a training environment. They're not trying to teach you difficult passwords, but they also know that students have typos and whatnot, and when you go into lab 212, for example, if you put a password in there, forget to remove it, then the tech has to get rid of it. Well, the first thing the tech's going to try is Cisco and class because all the labs use that. And often that clears the password. But if they don't, then they have to remove the password. So there is a reason why in the training environment they use something simple. But when you are out in the field, you need to use more complex passwords. Configuring a password. All right, so I already explained you could take a laptop with the console cable, you can walk up to your switch or your router, and you can connect and you can start configuring it. So we need to actually put a password on that blue console connection. And the way you do that, the command for that is line is configure terminal to get into global configuration mode. Then you need to go to the line configuration mode, and the way you do that is type line console 0. Another thing I'll teach you at this point is Cisco, for some reason, doesn't start with the first of anything. They always start with the 0 of anything. So ports on a switch are labeled 0, 1, 2, 3. Console lines, which they're normally are just 1, sometimes it's 2, I guess. But console line starts with 0, not 1. So when you see console line 0, this is literally saying the first console line. We're going to sign into it. So now we're into lines, console line sub-configuration mode, and we're going to put a password, and we're going to put the password is going to be Cisco. We're going to store it in a local database as compared to an authentication server, remote on a network. At the school campus, when you sign into your class, when you sign into the network, you are using a remote authentication server. That's why you can be at any computer and still sign in. If it was a local, it would be local to that computer. Then you end to get out of the command, and now you have set the password on the line console 1. Now we want to also put some encryption on that password, and the command for that is enable secret class. Now, class is the password, and we're with the enable command, we're setting the password, the secret password of class. And then here we also want to put a password on the VTY lines. Now there are 16 VTY lines, 0 through 15. Now, a previous teacher of mine taught me that you generally don't want to have 16 VTY lines. You don't want to have 16 people telnetting or SSHing into a piece of equipment at one time. She said, generally speaking, you only want to have 3. The IT person and the IT person's supervisor. Now, I personally think you would want 4 because you might need your supervisor to get in and help you as well. So I would suggest 0 through 3. Now, in this class, I want you to put whatever the instructions say. So if the instructions say 0 to 4, 0 to 15, 0 to 3, I don't care what it says. You put what it says. Just so you earn all of the points. But just realize this is 16 people that can sign into a piece of equipment virtually. Now the command to configure a password on a virtual line is configure terminal, get into global configuration mode. Once you're in there, you type line VTY 0 to 15, and then you're in config line, and then you want to type password Cisco. That sets the password of Cisco for each of these VTY lines, and then log in, and then end to get out of that. Now, I want you to note that the last step is to set encryption on your passwords. So the encryption command is service password encryption. Pretty easy. You're setting the encryption service. Took me a while to learn that command, but once you get, you're encrypting passwords, so its password is obvious, especially if you type to encrypt first and it doesn't get anywhere. But you got to remember you're setting service, you're enabling service to set the passwords, and that's the command. And then now look in your, if we hadn't set the password encryption, then it would have just had our plain text passwords and login information in the running configuration. And somebody that walks up to a computer, is on the other side of the wall with Wireshark running on a laptop, sniffing your traffic, could clearly and easily see the commands the clear text passwords and login information. Once you've set service password encryption, now you can see we have encryption set, and you cannot tell what the password is. The next basic command you're going to set is banner message of the day. It's banner messages. When somebody signs into a piece of equipment, the first thing they see is the banner message, and you should use it to warn unauthorized personnel from attempting to access the device. To create a banner message of the day on a device, use the banner MOTD and then some sort of character to start whatever you want it to say, and then another character. So now this pound sign, it could be an asterisk, it could be it's a delimiter. Whatever delimiter you put in there, it could be an asterisk, it could be an exclamation point. But just realize you can't use that exclamation point, pound sign, or what did I just use? Asterisk anywhere in the message. So if I typed M as the delimiter, and it would have stopped right here. If I used S, it would have stopped right here. If I use an exclamation point and it's the end of after the word day, then it would have stopped without showing the exclamation point because it would have been the end of the message. And you want to write something that's scary, because legal people will tell you that if you say welcome to the Pentagon network, then the person that breaks into the Pentagon can say, hey, I was welcomed. I was just stumbling around on my computer and I fell in and they said welcome. And so I was in there. I'm sorry. I didn't know I shouldn't be. So that's why you want to say something like unauthorized access only. And there's a video to show you that. We could probably skip this video, but what the heck. It is, we are on a roll. Why break the trend? Let's see, securing a switch.
When installing a device on a network, it's important to secure access to the device so only an administrator will be able to access it and make changes. To do this, we'll need to perform some initial configuration settings. I'll click on PC1. I'll click on the terminal emulation program. And now you can see that I have a console connection into the switch command line. I'll press enter, and this takes me to the command line interface. As you can see, I'm logged into the switch in UserExec mode. No password was required to access the command line. This is a security risk. If I type the enable command, you can see that I have now entered PrivilegedExec mode, also without any type of authentication. This presents a great security risk since from PrivilegedExec mode, I have access to configure the switch. The first thing you'll want to do is secure access to both the console connection and to PrivilegedExec mode. First, I'll control access to the console connection. To do that, I'll get into global configuration mode with the config T command, and then I'll type in line console 0 to enter line configuration mode. I can now put in a password for my console connection by typing the command password and a password of Cisco. For ease of this demonstration, I'm using simple passwords, but you'll want to use strong, complex passwords whenever possible. I'll type in the login command, which will require the password prior to entering UserExec mode. Next, I'll secure access to PrivilegedExec mode. To do this, I'll type exit to return to global configuration mode. Then I'll enter the command enable secret, followed by the password class. The secret parameter that I used assures me that the password class will be encrypted in the configuration file. Let's see if our passwords have been set correctly. I'll do a Control-C to get to PrivilegedExec mode, and then I'll exit the switch. Now when I press enter, I should be prompted for a password before establishing a console connection, and it does. This password should be Cisco. As I type in the password for security purposes, you won't be able to see any characters. If I type it incorrectly, it should take me into UserExec mode, and it does. And from here, I'll type enable, and you can see that now I'm prompted for another password. This time I'll type in class and press enter, and you can see now that I'm in PrivilegedExec mode. Only those with a knowledge of the correct passwords will be able to configure this device. Let's take a look at our running configuration file up to this point. I'll do that by typing in the command show running config. You can see at the top of the running configuration file that the enable secret password has been hashed within the file. To see the rest of the configuration, I'll press the space bar on my keyboard and I'll go down towards the bottom where you can see the configuration for the console line. Here, it shows a password of Cisco and you can see it in plain text. We'll change this a little later. Now that I've secured access to the console port, I'll also want to secure virtual terminal access for remote logins. From Global Configuration Mode, I'll type in the command line VTY and then how many lines I want to allow remote access to. The Cisco switch supports 16 simultaneous remote logins through virtual terminals. To configure all 16, I simply type in 0, a space, and 15 and press enter, and then I'll put in the command password Cisco and then login. Let's take a look at these passwords in our running configuration file. I'll do a Control-C to get to PrivilegedExec Mode, and then I'll do a show run, which is short for show running config. I'll spacebar all the way down to the end, and you can see under the configuration for the console line is the VTY line configuration. The iOS automatically breaks this down into 2 groups, the first 5 lines 0 through 4, followed by the next 10 lines 5 through 15. As with the console password, you can see that the VTY line passwords are also seen in plain text. We can add greater security to the switch if we can encrypt these passwords so that they are obscured in the configuration file. To do this, I'll go back to Global Configuration Mode, then I'll enter the command service password encryption. This command will put a light level of encryption on all passwords on the switch. To verify that password encryption has been set, I'll exit Global Configuration Mode and type Show Run to view the running configuration file. If I spacebar down to the end, you can now see that the console password as well as the VTY line password has been encrypted. Another important initial configuration command is setting a banner message. This is a message that will be presented to users when they log in and serves as a legal warning for any would-be hackers. To do this, I'll go to Global Configuration Mode, and then I'll type in the command banner MOTD. That stands for Message of the Day. The message that I type will need to be framed between 2 delimiters or characters. Just make sure that whatever character you choose is not used within the body of your message. For instance, I'll use a £sign for my delimiters, and then in between, I'll put in the message authorized access only. Violators will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And then I'll end it with another £sign. And now the banner is set. Now let's verify it. I'll do a Control-C and then type exit to leave the switch, and then I'll press enter. Notice that I'm presented with the banner warning I just typed in, as well as a request for a password just to get access to the console. I'll put in the password Cisco and press enter, and now I'm in UserExec mode, and then I'll type the command enable, and I'm asked for another password to reach PrivilegedExec mode. I'll type in class, and now I have full access to the switch.
All right, let's get that video. And now we're going to talk about saving configurations. So when you are, there's 2 file servers, there's 2 file systems that store device configuration. The startup configuration, this is the save configuration that is stored in NVRAM. NV stands for non-volatile, which means the flash does not lose the contents when the device is powered off. It contains all of the commands that will be used by the device upon startup or reboot. I like to think of it as DOS, right? I'm sorry, not DOS, BIOS. It's like BIOS in an older configuration, whatever they call it now, easy, whatever it is nowadays. But BIOS it basically stores all the information about your system, where the hard drive is, how much RAM you have, all that stuff. And you can do some configurations like the time you can configure in your BIOS. Now, the running configuration, it's stored in RAM, and it reflects the current configuration. Modifying a running configuration affects the operation of the Cisco device immediately, but RAM is volatile. It loses all of the content when the device is powered off or restarted. So after you make changes to the running configuration, you need to save those running configuration files to the startup configuration so that the next time the next time the router or the switch is turned off, the device loads with the new configuration. The command you want to use is the copy running configuration. I'm sorry, don't type it all out. It's literally is copy running config space startup config. In global configuration, and that will then copy the everything that's in the running configuration to yes, of course. We don't actually type out ever copy running configuration startup configuration. When you've used the Cisco router for long enough, all you type is copy run start. Now again, when you go to take the CCNA exam, it's going to expect you to know the real command, not the shortcut that we use. But absolutely, copy run start, because guess what? Running configuration is unique. Startup configuration is unique. The whole word. So if you run, R-U-N is unique. Start is unique. Okay, good. And then you can, after you copy run start, you can do a show startup configuration to see what it looks like. And then you can show the running configuration. And what I don't like about this is they basically showed you the same exact information. I really wish they had showed you that a running configuration that had some of the configuration that we had already configured in this class in the running configuration to show you that you have to copy run to start in order to preserve your configurations. Now, how do you alter the running configuration? Well, if the changes made to the running configuration do not have the desired effect that you intended, you can restore the device to the previous configuration by using the reload button before you type copy run start. Because remember, it's just running in RAM. So by reloading the operating system, you erase whatever is currently running in the running configuration. By the way, you can also turn off the router. You can unplug the switch, turn it back on, plug it back in, and then you go back to the startup configuration. You can also remove the changes individually. So let's say you put an IP address on a port, and then later you say, oh my God, I have a typo in my IP address. Just go remove by typing no IP address and whatever the incorrect IP address is, and then put the new IP address in there, and then you will be fine. And then now, if you save the startup configuration, the running configuration that is not correct into the startup configuration, well, now you need to possibly clear all of the configurations on your switch, not just in one or two, like you did up here, and then copy run start again. But maybe you messed it up so much that you need to just start with a new start your router or switch with a new startup configuration. And the way you do that is just router erase startup config, and literally it erases the startup configuration that's stored in NVRAM. And when you reboot your switch, you get, guess what? A blank running configuration that you can then start to configure. Here we have a video for 5.3.
After you've begun some initial configurations on your switch, you'll want to know how to save your configuration. You can see that I'm using Packet Tracer and I have a command line interface to the switch. Notice the banner message and then I'm being prompted for a password. I'll put in the password Cisco, type enable password class to get to privileged exec mode. I'll type in configure terminal to get to global config mode, and I'll set the host name of the switch to S1. To save the configuration on the switch, I'll go back to privileged exec mode by typing exit and pressing enter. And then from privileged exec mode, I put in the command copy running -config startup -config. This command means copy the running configuration to the startup configuration file. The running configuration is the currently working configuration that's running in RAM memory. The startup configuration file is stored in NVRAM memory. The difference is that RAM is volatile and NVRAM is non-volatile, so if you copy the configuration to NVRAM, it will be available when the switch is restarted or reloaded. So I'll press enter, and you can see that I'm prompted for the destination file name. The default name is startup-config, and you can see it between the brackets. I'll press enter to accept the name within the brackets. My configuration is now saved. I can verify the location of my saved configuration file by putting in the command dir for directory. I'll put a space and a question mark, and you can see that there's two different types of storage that I have access to: flash memory and NVRAM. Both of these are non-volatile. The flash memory holds the iOS operating system, and the NVRAM holds the configuration file. I'll put in NVRAM and a colon and press enter, and you can see there's the startup-config file. Now, if I was to reload the switch or incur a power failure, my configurations will remain. I'll press the arrow keys on my keyboard and do an up arrow to go back to the command copy running-config startup-config. There's an easier way of typing this command with command shortening. Instead of having to type out running-config and startup-config, I can simply type copy run start, and command shortening will finish the command for me. If I reload the switch, I'll put in the reload command, proceed with reload, I'll press enter to confirm. We'll see that after the switch reloads, that the host name will remain S1, and we should see the same banner message. You can see there's the banner message. I'm prompted for a password. This indicates that the configuration was saved, and the host name or device name shows up on the command prompt, also indicating that the configuration was successfully saved and reloaded upon startup. If I wish to erase the configuration, I'll type in enable, put in my password to get back to privileged exec mode. I can put in the command erase STA. I'll press the tab key to finish the command, and the full command is erase startup-config. I'll press enter, and I'm given a warning. Do I want to really do this? Do I want to continue? The default answer is confirm, so I'll press enter. You can see the message output to the screen indicating that the NVRAM has been altered, or in this case, erased. I can now reload the switch, and this time, upon reload, it should take us directly to the switch command prompt without any authentication required or banner message. I'll press enter, and you can see that I'm brought directly to the switch command prompt. The host name S1 is no longer there, nor banner message, nor line console 0 password required. Let's say I make some changes to the switch. For instance, I'll type enable and config T to get to global configuration mode. And I'll change the host name to my switch. You can see the device name is now my switch. I'll exit and save the configuration. So the running configuration has been saved to the startup configuration file. Now, let's say I continue with some additional configurations. I get to global config mode, and I set a line console 0 password to Cisco. I put in the login command, and let's say I change the host name one more time, this time to S1. Now I've made these changes. Now the current state of the switch is that it's running the latest configurations in running configuration. That means the latest configurations are running in RAM memory. Let's say I'm no longer happy with the configurations I've just added to the switch, and I want to go back to the last saved state. The last saved state is where the device name was named My Switch. I've changed it now to S1, but I haven't saved the configuration. I can revert back to the previous saved configuration by exiting to PrivilegedExec Mode and copying, in this case, not the running config to the startup config, but the opposite. I'll copy the startup configuration to the running configuration. This will load the startup configuration file into RAM and make it the new running configuration. I'll press enter and I'll accept the default. And you can see that the switch has changed names back to My Switch. The startup config was loaded into the running config. This does not completely erase the running config, but rather the configurations in the startup config will be merged into the running config. Knowing how to save your configuration and erase a configuration and reload the switch is an important skill to master.
All right. So let's grab that page and pull that over. We are getting towards the end here, but there's a couple more important concepts to talk about. So, for example, one thing they talk about is you can use PuTTY or TerraTerm to copy a text, create a text file. You can then use that text file to prove something or to keep a backup of what you typed, or you can actually use it to then maybe go into another piece of equipment and configure it. So if you got 5 switches, you're configuring all the same way, or 5 routers all the same way, except for the IP address is something you can go in and you can set I'll show it to you later in the class where you can take commands and then you can eliminate some pieces of it, and then you can just copy and paste into a new piece of equipment and it works just fine. And you're going to do a packet tracer about configuring initial switch settings. Ports and addresses, configuring an IP address. So now interfaces and ports, network communications devices depend on end user devices, networking devices, interfaces, and cables that connect them. So you got routers and switches and cables. Now we talked about cables last week a little bit. And there are different features and benefits of different types of equipment and different types of connections and other piece of equipment, why you would use, say, a firewall. But anyways, the distance the media has to successfully carry the signal, the environment which the media is to be installed, the amount of data and the speed at which it needs to be transmitted, or the cost of the media installation. You know, getting the top of if you have a small mom and pop company, they probably cannot afford the top of the line router. Maybe they can, maybe they're making a ton of money. But if they only have 4 computers that you're networking, yes, you got to think about the future and expansion, but you don't want to buy something. Maybe you don't need to buy something with 24 ports because right now they have 4 computers, right? You get the idea. You can set IP addresses manually and each operating system is a little different. I'll just introduce that IPv4 addresses. You should know this already from your software class, but IPv4 addresses have 4 octets, and the octets run decimal numbers 0 through 255. Remember, an IP address and an IPv6 address, it's all 1s and 0s. There's nothing else a computer talks to, but each of the IPv4 subnet mask is 32-bit value. We'll learn about subnetting. So here's an IP address, a private IP address. Here's a subnet. That's, if you know something about subnetting, 255.255.255.0 means you have 255 addresses. In this case, this is a network, the one network, and it's the 10th address. I'm getting ahead of myself. The default gateway allows a network device to be able to leave its own network and get out to the internet instead of being stuck in the one network. IPv6 has 128 bits instead of 32. We'll talk more about that later, but it's in groups of 4 hexadecimal digits. Oh no, it's groups of 4 hexadecimal digits separated by a colon. And here is an example of an IPv6 address. There are 340 undecillion addresses in IPv6, where IPv4 only has 4 billion addresses. So you can see that I'll tell you how many IP addresses is 340 undecillion when we get to that later in the course, okay? You can do it manually. You can configure it by typing in the address, and you can do it automatically by allowing DHCP to feed the addresses. Obviously, DHCP is how network technicians generally want to configure pieces of equipment, because when you plug in a device like a laptop or a host computer into a network, it will automatically get an IP address. Compared to manually, a technician would have to leave the network operating center and drive to wherever you are and manually configure it in person. A switch virtual interface allows a switch to be able to be accessed remotely. Switch ports don't have IP addresses. Router ports do, but a switch has an IP address so that somebody out at the network operating center, the NOC, will be able to telnet or SSH into the piece of equipment by using the IP address that you configure. In this case, global configuration, go into the VLAN 1 as your to get to the interface VLAN 1 configuration, and then you set an IP address and a subnet, and then you type no shutdown. Now switches that brings the port that assigns the port to the I'm assuming it was down, but when you get into switches, by default all of the ports are up, but you still need to remember when you put an IP address in there, always type no shutdown afterwards. If it's already up, you put an IP address on, typing no shutdown will have no effect, but if it's down, putting the IP address in there will bring it up. You need to type no shutdown, okay? A router, you absolutely need to type no shutdown, because when you take a router out of a box, everything is down by default. So everything is in shutdown, and then you have to say no shutdown to bring it up. Exit, and then don't forget to set the IP, the default gateway, because the default gateway will allow that switch to get outside of the network. The default gateway is the router port that's connected to the network. You're going to do a packet tracer, implementing basic connectivity, verifying connectivity. Okay, so there's a video to talk about testing the interface, and then we'll do another video talking about testing end-to-end connectivity using ping. And those are the last two videos, I think, of the class. So let's get down to 2.8. .1.
In this video, I need to verify that the IP addresses 192.168.1.2 and 192.168.1.3 have been assigned to switches S1 and S2. These IP addresses should have been assigned to the default switched virtual interface, or interface VLAN 1, on both switches. In order to verify this, I will first connect a console cable from PCA into switch S1. I click on the console cable, I click on PCA, and connect it to the RS-232 serial port and then stretch the cable to switch S1 and connect it to the console port. Now I'll click on PCA, click on the terminal emulation program, and click OK to accept the default configuration setting, and this should take me to the command line interface on switch S1. From here, I'll type enable to switch to PrivilegedExec mode, and then I can issue the show IP interface brief command to examine the interfaces on switch S1. I will need to press the space bar in order to view the full display. At the end of the output, you can see interface VLAN 1, and it has an IP address of 192.168.1.2. However, if you look in this column, you'll see that the state of the interface is administratively down. This means that that interface is in a shutdown state. You can also see that the line protocol of the interface is also down. In order to correct that, I first need to go into global configuration mode. Then I'll go into interface configuration mode for interface VLAN 1, and I will issue the no shutdown command, which will activate the interface. And you can see that I'm immediately presented with a message that indicates that the interface has changed its state to up. From here, I press enter, Control C, and enter again to return to PrivilegedExec mode. And now I can use the up arrow on my keyboard to reissue the show IP interface brief command and then verify that now the state of that interface is up and up, meaning that it is physically up and the line protocol is now up. Next, I will verify the switch virtual interface configuration on S2. To do that, I will connect a console cable from PCB's serial port into the console port of switch S2. Click on PCB, go to the Desktop tab, open the Terminal Emulation Program, accept the default configuration settings, and then that should take me to the command line interface of switch S2. From here, I will enter PrivilegedExec mode and then issue the show IP interface brief command to examine the interfaces on switch S2. You can see at the end of the output, we have interface VLAN 1, and at this point, it has not yet been assigned an IP address. To assign an IP address, I will first enter global configuration mode, and then interface configuration mode for interface VLAN 1, and I'll assign the address by using the IP address command and give it the address 192.168.1.3 followed by its subnet mask. In order to activate the interface, I will use the no shutdown command, or no shut for short, and you can see that the interface has changed its state to up. From here, I will do Control C and press enter to return to PrivilegedExec mode, and again reissue that show IP interface brief command to examine the interfaces, press my space bar, and at the end of the output, I can see that interface VLAN 1 has been assigned the IP address 192.168.1.3, and the state of the interface is up and up.
I really like that video because she covers a lot of the things that we talked about in this class, and she does it in a troubleshooting process. And that's going to be your biggest challenge in being a Cisco technician is troubleshooting problems. Yes, you'll be installing video, but you will be troubleshooting, and that is where your challenges. Here's some additional troubleshooting. We're going to use, I think, the ping. Yep, we use the ping to learn how to test connections.
To test the connections between all of the devices, as well as the IP address assignments on both switches and both PCs, I'll use the ping command. To do this, I'll click on PCA, click on the command prompt, and I'll begin by pinging switch S1. I will issue the ping 192.168.1.2 command. And you can see from the display that the first ping request timed out. However, I got successful replies for the last 3. This response is typical when you're first testing a connection, and the reason for which goes beyond the scope of this demonstration. If I arrow up and recall that ping command, you'll see that now all 4 echo request packets receive a reply. Next, I'll test connectivity between PCA and switch S2 by issuing the ping 192.168.1.3 command. Again, you can see that the first request timed out, the last 3 were successful, and if I recall the command, I get 4 successful echo replies. Next, I'm going to test connectivity between PCA and PCB. To do that, I will ping 192.168.1.11, PCB's address. And you can see that I got responses for all 4 echo requests. It's also a good idea to test connectivity in the reverse direction. To do that, I will click on PCB, click on the command prompt, and I will issue a ping command back to PCA at address 192.168.1.10. And you can see that I get a successful response when I ping from PCB back to PCA. It's always a good idea to test connectivity in both directions when working on a real network, because if you can ping from one device to another, but not in the reverse direction, it usually indicates that there is an issue with your firewall. And by default, Windows Firewall will block ICMP echo requests and needs to be turned off.
Great. Good news is that is the end. Again, just to show you where I got all these videos on itexamanswers.net. There are lots of good resources on that website, but do not use the multiple choice answers that you'll find here on your exams in my classroom. Don't do that. You're not going to learn. All right, that we'll go back to our presentation. You are going to do a packet tracer 2.9.1. and a lab 2.9.2. That's your first NetLab assignment that you are going to do. Nowadays, in the newest version of our software, of our NetAcad software, they actually give you a packet tracer. In addition to the equipment lab. You need to do the equipment lab, but remember, use the lab that the PDF instructions that you find inside of NetLab. If you're watching my YouTube presentation of this, then you would obviously want to use the packet tracer because you don't have access to NetLab. In fact, that's all true all through the semester. If I say NetLab, we have access to equipment that you probably don't have, which is real equipment that is on a server, and we access it remotely. You probably don't have that access. But anyway, that is my presentation. Thank you so much for coming to class. My name is Don Lafond, Professor Don. If you're watching live, hang out. I'm going to give you a period to ask some questions, and I'll answer whatever I can. If you're watching it as a recording in our classroom, put your questions inside our help discussion forum. And if you're watching it on YouTube, ask your questions in the comments down below the video, and I'll make sure I answer those. And all of you should all go to my video postings and put checks, even if you put a check in the box saying you liked my presentations. Even if you were here live with me, it would help me out. I appreciate that. All right, so thank you so much. I'll see you again next week. It has been my pleasure to present Module 2, and next week we'll move on to Module 3. So fantastic. Thank you so much for coming.